The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents International Focus, a weekly discussion of the people and events behind today's global headlines. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now here's your host, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus. As the world's 1.2 billion Roman Catholics celebrate the installation of a new pontiff, we'll look today at the extent to which the Church plays a role in temporal politics across the globe. With permanent observer status at the UN and diplomatic missions in over 100 countries, the Holy See is not only the focal point of a global spiritual community, but the coordinating body of a far-flung multinational bureaucracy. To help us explore the Vatican's role in international political life, we're joined by Michael Fleet, recently retired professor of political science and director of undergraduate studies at Marquette University. His work includes numerous books and articles on politics and religion in Latin America. His forthcoming book is entitled The Political Influence of the Catholic Church in an Era of Secularization. Michael Fleet, welcome to International Focus.
Thank you.
Well, I'm wondering if we could start with just sort of a broad brush treatment of what we mean by the Holy See, and what does the bureaucracy really look like?
Well, the Vatican is a sovereign city-state, entirely surrounded by the city of Rome and by the country of Italy, equally sovereign state as well. It has been a sovereign state since 1927. This is a vestige of the seizure by the Italian government in the late 19th century of the papal states, which historically the Vatican and the Catholic Church, with its headquarters in Rome, controlled for centuries and defended with its armies. It was a real player in that era of international politics and of European politics in particular. It's now been reduced to a small segment of the large city of Rome, but from there it directs a worldwide evangelical operation involving some 2,000 to 3,000 employees within the Vatican City itself in various ministries, congregations, and agencies. And through them, it directs the activities of Catholic archdioceses and dioceses and of religious orders of men and women throughout the world.
And there's a sort of an analog to a secular Secretary of State and that bureaucracy.
There is indeed. There's a division of labor or power, if you will, that would resemble that of a typical secular state. Many people have argued over the years that the Vatican does this on a shoestring, despite its enormous buildings and the splendor of its art holdings and paintings. It employs relatively few people and gets the most out of them, more out of them, I suspect, than the average state bureaucracy. But of late, of course, it's come under scrutiny for mismanagement and for problems in effective communication and cooperation between its various ministries and agencies. And one of the, I think, first tasks facing the new Pope will be to bring back a little more order and a little smoother flow of business within this bureaucratic network.
And that brings up an interesting point. I mean, what is the relationship between the Pope and this bureaucracy? I mean, I think some people have the notion that the Pope reigns supreme in all aspects of the bureaucracy as well. So.
Well, I think without being privy to its inner workings on a day-to-day basis, I read and learn from the accounts of others who will argue that the Pope hasn't run the Vatican for at least 30 years, not since the latter stages of the papacy of Paul VI. The two popes that followed him, John Paul II and Benedict XVI, were both popes who liked to travel and who traveled extensively with different styles and different agendas, but neither of them wanted to spend their time in Rome overseeing this bureaucracy. And as a result, I think the bureaucracy was left for the first time in many years to the presidents of the congregation, to the heads and underheads of these, the secretaries and undersecretaries of these various congregations, which are staffed largely by Italian prelates who have made a career of holding such bureaucratic positions within the church. There are non-Italians as well, but typically most of them are what we call Romanized in the process of ascending the various levels. And so this is a very substantial institution that recent popes have not tried, nor have they succeeded in bringing under control. That will be the challenge of the new pope, who comes to the job with perhaps more experience and with more success in bureaucratic management, among other things.
So let's focus on one of those positions. They're basically the Secretary of State, if you will, of the Vatican, the person that oversees the missions around the world. What does that job really involve?
Well, he's the person who represents the church at the highest diplomatic level, short of that of the Pope himself. He does it on a daily basis. He's in touch with the nuncios that represent the papacy.
So the nuncios are basically the Vatican ambassadors.
They are ambassadors to sovereign states throughout the world. They are usually experienced diplomats whose career within the church has been entirely in the area of institutional representation. Very few of them have been bishops or archbishops responsible for a diocese or an archdiocese. Most of them have chosen the career of the diplomatic career as a way of serving the church and the people, and they're quite impressive. I've met a couple of them in my travels through Latin America, and they're crafty, they're thoughtful, they're strategic animals, and they represent the church and its interests. They report on developments, they interact with local clergy, they attempt to project an image for the church to the Catholic population and to the population of the country as a whole. They're a rather impressive group, but very jealous of their prerogatives, and the relationship between a nuncio who represents the Vatican in a country and the conference of bishops of that country can be a source of conflict, can be an occasion for repeated push and resistance from Rome and on the part of the local bishops.
Well, we have some sense of what the charge might be for a typical, say, American ambassador, and sort of the administration's perception of what American interests are and what he or she should be looking out for. Could you give us some sense of sort of what those interests are for a nuncio, and what is he charged with doing?
He's charged with doing what he's asked to do by the Secretary of State and by the Pope, who stands behind the Secretary of State. He's charged with doing it in as an effective a manner as he can, and that will very much depend on his personal charm, his political skills, the efficiency of his staff, and his aggressiveness in pursuing this agenda beyond formal contacts with the government. It might involve influencing the tenor of conversation or discussion or the development of pastoral materials within the bishops' conference. It could be in a much more public role, reaching out to American Catholics of one sort or another. And of course, one of the challenges faced by all church authorities these days is the diversity of opinion, of understanding of their faith, and of a sense of what's the right thing to do in connection with these difficult moral issues that have arisen in the last 40 or 50 years, and are now being weighed carefully by a much more educated and informed Catholic population. It's not the scarcely educated immigrant poor who follow docilely the instruction of the priest or the bishop. It's likely a professional with a university education, with access to information, and with a sense of moral responsibility of a personal sort that may be difficult for the bishops to deal with. And it's not like these lay people are all the same. The Catholic Church in the United States, the Catholic Church in any country, will typically represent a cross-section of national public opinion with different views on most of these issues, particularly in the 50 or so years since the Vatican Council in the middle of the previous 20th century.
So we've got just a couple of minutes before our break, but what is the expectation with regard to the relationship between the mission, the Vatican mission, headed by the nuncio, and the policy of the secular local government in which they find themselves? Is there any?
Well, in the case of the home country of the new Pope, Argentina, the relationship between President Kirchner initially, and now in her second term, his widow, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, was very difficult. It was Bergoglio, Pope Francis, former Archbishop Jorge Mario Bergoglio, was very critical of both administrations, both Argentine governments, for the lack of doing more on questions involving the extent of poverty and inequality in the country. A critique, if you will, of a Peronista sort of center-left or left government from the left, and yet an equally insistent critique of its position on gay marriage, on contraception, and on issues on which the Church, unlike the social issues, has a more conservative. There was a great deal of animosity and antagonism between the government and the local church, and therefore, in this case, between the government and the nuncio, who sided with the Archbishop, because the Archbishop was in effect defending positions that the Vatican approved of.
Well, we'll come back after a short break and talk a little bit about just where that influence is currently being felt more, where it may be on the wane. But first we'll take a short break and be back with more.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back. We're talking with Michael Fleet about the political influence of the Catholic Church. Well, are there sort of discernible regions where there is more of an ability to influence what's going on the part of the Vatican, do you think?
Well, these are difficult questions. In those areas of the world where the Church is growing, and those would be in Africa and in Asia, and to a lesser extent Latin America. There are more Catholics, and one might imagine that where there are more Catholics, there would be more influence or potential for influence of the Church. But particularly in Latin America, but I would argue in other parts of the world as well, where the Church is growing even more rapidly, the governments don't understand that and aren't as impressed by that, and have defined their policies and have chosen a direction in which they don't welcome Catholic suggestions or influence. Now, the case in Latin America, which I study, is somewhat different, because there, of course, the Church has had a long-standing interest in and influence over politics. But even though it is growing, its capacity for influencing society has been diminishing. There are fewer priests, not absolutely, but in terms proportional to the size of the Catholic population. So the number of Catholics that each priest has to handle, or each nun has to handle, is much greater than it was, and it was never a very good ratio. The Church never had real day-to-day contact with that many people. Lots of areas of the country go unchurched, and the Church's influence is confined to social projects, to hospitals or healthcare centers or educational centers, and are not in the sort of normal religious setting, not a mass, not a sacramental ritual like baptism. If you look at the figures, the Church is actually, Mass is more sparsely attended. There are fewer baptisms, there are fewer confirmations, First Communions. The Church has only really its public voice, and here it also faces competition of the sort that it never did before. Competition from the television and print media, competition from the internet, competition from social organizations, non-governmental organizations that crowd the public arena and compete with the Church for the ear and for the heart of the people. And this is all part of, at least in my view, part of a broader process of secularization and modernization, which has been underway for many years, which increases with the further development of these economies and their interaction with other parts of the world, and has posed a challenge to the Church, a secular era in which the Church has to find a new way to play its traditional role. And this is what has divided so many people at the grassroots level within the Church, and so many priests, nuns, and religious authorities at the institutional level, how to face and address secularization, how to bring the message of the gospel to people in an effective manner given the distractions and the competing voices of an increasingly secular society.
So let's look at that, what perhaps could be a high water mark in the influence of the Church in a particular case, and that would be Poland during the sort of Solidarity era. What was the dynamic there?
Well, the dynamic there was that the Catholic Church was the only institution outside the official communist institutions of the regime capable of operating independently and effectively. It had direct access to its people, and it was, if you will, a surrogate for all manner of resistance and opposition to the regime. It embraced the trade union movement, using the vehicle of its social teaching, a tradition of analysis and of advocacy on social issues that goes back to the latter part of the 19th century. Very respectable. It used that to defend independent labor unions and to place itself as an alternative in terms of loyalty and in terms of public following to the communist regime. It was enormously successful, as it was, I would argue, in a number of Latin American countries where, in the face of not a communist regime but a military dictatorship, it played a similar role as the rallying institution behind which people could safely resist and critique the regime. It didn't do that to the same extent in Argentina. Argentina is a sort of exception to the rule established in a number of other countries during the years of military government, an exception to the rule that the Church usually took the side of the poor and added its voice to those calling for restoral of democracy. It didn't do that to nearly the same extent in Argentina. It rather tried to use its traditionally close relationships with the governments of Argentina, civilian and military alike, to press for change from within, but on a necessarily more cautious and gradual basis. It failed to do that, and many people are quite critical of it for the role that it did not somehow play in the transition from military to civilian rule.
And so that certainly has its echoes in some of the questions raised about the new pope. Then
it does indeed. It does indeed. It's clear to me that any public figure within the church or beyond it in Argentina today is going to be the subject of scrutiny and criticism. It's a very challenging environment in which to operate politically or ecclesially. That being said, it's clear that neither the Argentine bishops nor the Pope Francis, who was, before he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires, the provincial head of the Jesuit order for 6 years, did not do everything within their power to defend the poor or to defend their priests who were working closely with the poor and coming under suspicion from military authorities. I don't think there was any betrayal of any of those people, but clearly there wasn't a stout defense of them or a willingness to stand up publicly and critique the government. The decision, a difficult one to be sure, the decision made by the Argentine church authorities, Father Bergoglio in his capacity as Jesuit provincial as well, was to work from behind the scenes for incremental changes. And I don't know that any of us would have performed or acted any differently for that, but that failure or that unwillingness to be more outspoken has caused great concern among Argentine Catholics and among critics of the Argentine Church in ways that one doesn't come across in other Latin American countries. I think Father Bergoglio, Archbishop Bergoglio, and now Pope Francis will move on this furor that has arisen initially will die down. I think the things that he's about to do, the changes he may be able to make within the church at the world level will overshadow in importance the murky historical record in Argentina.
Well, just taking a step back, what can we draw as conclusions about what it says about this point in the Church's history from his biography? Yeah. The fact that he's Latin American, the fact that he is a Jesuit. Yeah. Does this say anything, or is it just interesting?
I would say neither of those does. But what does speak loudly to me is the effectiveness with which he governed the Catholic Church in at least the city of Buenos Aires. He was Archbishop for almost 15 years. He was a very efficient and effective and forceful Archbishop. And I think unlike the preceding popes, John Paul and Benedict, he will not let the curia have the run of the Vatican. I think he is as much a social progressive and as much a theological and organizational conservative as either of them, as these lines of division go within the church today. But I think as an administrator, he's really a remarkably astute and effective one. And I think he'll take on the curia, and if he doesn't do anything else to the papacy but bring the curia under better control, making it more effective and accountable, then I think he will have done a great service to the church.
Well, and in our last few minutes, what do you think will be the political influence going forward, given all of these factors that we've talked about?
Well, it seems to me that we're not going to see again an era in which the church was one of the three powers that be in in Latin America or on the world stage. Those days are gone. In an era of secularization, religion and religions are so diverse and are so themselves influenced by secularization that they can't have the kind of pure religious influence that they once had on either heads of state or on political constituencies. We're all more independent now. We're not as docile as we once were. It's up to these church leaders, I think, to find new ways of leading by example and of urging morally people to consider things in a different way, but not telling Catholics in the pew what to do and not telling heads of state what is expected of them. I think those days are gone. I think we're a more mature world, and the Catholic Church, which has been a more hierarchical church for longer than most others, I think will change. And it strikes me that this Archbishop, this Argentine Archbishop, now Pope Francis, is smart enough and astute enough, an organizational man, to understand that and to achieve that.
Very good. Well, thank you for those insights, Michael Fleet. To our viewers, we'll see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,